This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by AIM EC Herbicide from FMC. Power up your spring burn-off and savings with AIM EC Herbicide. Control the toughest weeds, plus get $4 off per acre with the ACE Resistant Weeds program. Visit ag.fmc.com for more.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. We got a great RealAg Issues panel for you here today. Kyle Larkin of the Grain Growers of Canada. And let's bring in our panel. Up first, it's Lyndsey Smith coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, how are we doing?
We're doing well. We are, I feel very much like this was the last week of, at least from the conference perspective, et cetera, of quiet. But that's okay because Ottawa more than made up for it. So we did not get a week of peace that I was hoping for before the madness of the conference season.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Also joining us is Kelvin Heppner coming out of the fine area of southern Manitoba. Kelvin, how are we doing?
Doing well here, Shaun. And Lyndsey, I thought conferences had started. Byrne was at Southwest Ag Conference all week. Yep. We had St. Jean Farm Days, the biggest little town farm show in Western Canada, just down the road here this week as well. So
was it minus 35?
They're rolling. No, we actually hit zero. That was yesterday. It was a brief reprieve as we're headed back to minus 20 temperatures here.
I've been to St. Jean Farm Days, and it's always been minus 35. It's so cold.
See, Kelvin, Lyndsey used to live in Saskatchewan, and her Saskatchewan was showing there because she sees the beginning of conference season being crop production show.
That's next week.
Yes.
That's when it starts.
We all have our regionality biases.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, you can take the girl out of Saskatchewan, but
there you go.
Coming out of the girl. Also joining us is Meagan Murdoch, coming out of Toronto, Ontario. Meagan, how are we doing?
We're doing really well. I'm always relieved that you're all experiencing lower temperatures than I am. I get cold here in Toronto with our -8, and then I talk to you fine folks and remember that there are worse places to be.
Well, I'm sure it was a busy week at Hill and Knowlton.
It really was.
But you're talking about temperatures. I think we're like +5 Celsius, +8 Celsius here today in Lethbridge.
Oh, balmy.
And I don't know, 80, just a light 80K wind.
Well, sunniest place in Canada.
Yeah, Justin Funk who works with us with Real Agri Studies, he was in Lethbridge this week doing some training, and he looked on the west horizon. He said, "Is that a Chinook arch?" I was like, "Yes, it is." He's like, "Wow." I was like, "Yeah, you get over it."
Yeah, you don't see those in Guelph too often.
not very often.
No, you really don't.
At all. Hey, coming up, we're going to take a break, and coming up is Kyle Larkin. He's Executive Director with the Grain Growers of Canada. We're going to ask him, what is the impact of proroguing Parliament on some of these private members' bills? There's a lot of confusion out there. And then we'll unleash the panel on him, and they're going to press him on a number of different issues that are impacting agriculture across the country. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Farmers feed the world with an ever-growing population and less acreage to do it. Since 1946, Nature's Alpine Solutions has been providing sustainable fertility solutions for all crops. We don't just sell fertilizer, we live and work in agriculture every single day. We're the pioneers of liquid fertility, selling the Nature's brand in the U.S. and the Alpine brand in Canada. To learn more, call us at 877-265-BIO-K today.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Through Through a growing storm of kochia, cleavers, chickweed, and more, there's a clear path. Introducing Oxbow, a versatile cereal broadleaf herbicide that gets the job done. Powered by Duplisan technology, Oxbow is your workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds. With flexibility in timing, rates, and recropping options, your path is clear. Find your way on the path of least resistance at newfarm.ca/Oxbow.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Hey, farmers, trust is everything. Genesis Fertilizers is making real progress toward providing reliable, locally produced fertilizer. Join the ownership group and protect your bottom line. Learn more at genesisfertilizers.com/credibility. Looking forward to be at the Genesis event in Saskatoon, a crop production show Wednesday night. Looking forward to moderating a panel and emceeing their event. You can get up to date on the progress they're making with that facility and more. Go to genesisfertilizers.com. Okay, we got the panel introduced. Let's bring in our guest for this segment. It is the Executive Director with Grain Growers of Canada. It is Kyle Larkin. Hey, Kyle, how's it going? Great to have you back on the show.
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Pretty good. Hey, before I unleash the panel on you, and they pressed you on a number of different issues, we've had a kind of we're going to talk about it a little bit more in the show, but a crazy week. Prime Minister stepping down, a lot of talk about proroguing Parliament. You've been in Ottawa circles for quite some time. I guess, what is the impact of proroguing Parliament in your eyes?
Yeah, I mean, outside of all the bills that we're watching through Grain Growers of Canada, I think the major impact is Ottawa gets a little quieter. I mean, most members of Parliament and senators are going to go back home to their constituencies, likely going to be doing a lot more community events than they would have otherwise if they were still in Ottawa. But that doesn't mean the work stops, as someone like Meagan would know. There's still a lot more work to be done in Ottawa. Political staffers are going to continue being busy, ministers' offices and public servants. So the function of government doesn't stop. Certainly legislation and progress on any type of bills or policies stop, but the work of government certainly doesn't stop, which means, our advocacy on behalf of grain farmers is going to continue up until Parliament returns on March 24th.
Now, with a lot of questions from the audience, and quite frankly, I've been a little bit confused at times because this isn't like an everyday or every year kind of thing where we prorogue Parliament. What happens to private members' bills versus what happens to bills that were in process that the government had brought forward?
I'm so glad you asked that question because it's ultra technical, and I've been doing my reading of all the parliamentary rules this week, so I can brief you on where we're at. But very simply, the House of Commons and the Senate have different rules. So I'll start with the House of Commons. In the House, all government bills have effectively died on the order paper. So any bills that were tabled by a minister of the Crown have died on the order paper, and the only way they can return to the stage that they were at in the House of Commons is pretty much by unanimous consent in the House. And as we know, in the House right now, tough to get anything discussed, let alone unanimous consent. So I don't see that happening in the future. But private members' bills, such as C-234, are treated differently. They actually return to the stage that they were last at in the House of Commons. So they're treated differently than government bills. In the Senate, the rules are a little different. So government bills and private members' bills return to first reading. So a bill like C-282, for example, that was at the reporting stage in the Senate, now goes back to the start of the line, the starting line at the Senate. So it's an interesting time for sure. And one thing I want to highlight is I find this current government has been very allergic to proroguing. I think they've only prorogued once in the last 9 years, which is very rare for a government. I mean, even if you go back to the Harper government, there were more proroguing of Parliament than there was over the last 9 years. So this is, I think, even a unique situation that the government themselves find themselves in.
Okay, Kelvin, go ahead.
So it's 282 and these other bills, private members' bills, Kyle, are they effectively? Is this a moot point to talk about the technicalities in terms of what we can expect this spring when Parliament does return after March 24th?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, for all extents and purposes, both. So, what I've been talking about for the week now is we kind of have one win, two losses, and one question mark. The one win is on Bill C-282. Obviously, we've been advocating against that bill because it would have a major impact, detrimental impact on the ability of our trade negotiators to get the best deal possible for Canadian grain farmers, but also Canada's economy at large. That bill going back to first reading in the Senate effectively kills the bill, but it also kills C-234. So interestingly enough, because 234, the last stage that it was passed in the House was actually at third reading, it will automatically go to the Senate when Parliament returns on March 24th. So it'll actually be at first reading in the Senate as well, and senators there will have to decide how to treat that bill and if they want to expedite it or not. But all of those points are irrelevant. Because what we've heard this week, obviously, is the leaders of all the other opposition parties, so Pierre Poilievre, Jagmeet Singh, and Yves-François Blanchet, have all committed, and I take them by their word, but they've all committed that they'll be voting non-confidence on the government when it returns March 24th. And there's three options for them to do that, and one of those is likely to go through. If I was a betting person, I would definitely bet on one of those going through. One is the speech from the throne. The second one is a supply bill, so keeping the government funded. And the third one is there needs to be an opposition day motion. So there's three opportunities for the government to fall. And so I think by March 26th, we'll have the government falling, which means that we'll likely have an election either on May 5th or May 12th. So the whole month of April is going to be an election month. And then bills like C-234 or C-282 are irrelevant because we're in an election leading to a new parliament.
May is a great month, Lyndsey.
Yeah, I'm just going to point out, Shaun and I both celebrate our birthdays in early May. It's Mother's Day. There's the Kentucky Derby. Why not also have an election? I mean, it's perfect. Why not? Yeah.
You forgot about the Indy 500.
I did not forget. I did not forget, Shaun.
Lyndsey, question for Kyle.
Well, I want to switch gears a little bit because I think, and thank you for explaining that incredibly well, because I think there has been some misinformation out there about what has happened. I think it is important that we talk about the technicalities of this because rules are important and we will follow them. But I think the reality is that, as you said, we're probably headed to an election very shortly after March 24th. But wanted to switch gears a little bit to the U.S. Question, of course, to our trade issues. Maybe talk a little bit about news on the dispute resolution with the GMO corn into Mexico. What can you tell us about that file?
Yeah, I mean, number one priority for us right now has become the U.S.-Canada relationship since the election of President Donald Trump and the threats that he's posed to Canada with a 25% tariff. I mean, a 25% tariff on grain and grain products would be devastating to to the grain sector and grain farmers at large, and it would be doubly devastating because of the uncertainty we already have with our second largest trading partner, namely China. So look, we export over $17 billion worth of grain and grain products every year to the U.S. It is by far our most important market for barley, wheat, corn, soybeans, pulses, you name the crop. It's number one for all of the above. And any uncertainty in that market is going to have a devastating impact. And we're already seeing that uncertainty right now. I can tell you, I was speaking with a grain farmer a few weeks ago who was working through a program with Quaker Oats and was getting a premium for oats that he was delivering south of the border, actually delivering to North Dakota. And that program's gone already. So he was getting a premium for his oats. That program's gone. A lot of U.S. companies, I think, are already inshoring, which is exactly what President Trump wants from all of his various policies. So that's our number one priority. I can tell you we're working pretty close on it. I had an exclusive breakfast about a month ago with Minister of International Trade Mary Ng, Minister Sean Pang, and our ambassador to the U.S. Kirsten Hillman, where we discussed how important this relationship is and how the government needs to employ a Team Canada approach. And that's not just the government; that's including opposition parties, that's including provinces, and that's especially including stakeholders like grain farmers in those discussions. So we let them know loud and clear that anytime they go to the U.S. and if they're talking with stakeholders in Iowa or in Washington, D.C. or in California or in Texas, all of those states and almost every state in the U.S. is receiving grain and grain products for one reason or another. The other message we're also delivering is that American consumers rely heavily on U.S. grain. There's a reason they're importing $17 billion worth of grain and grain products. they need it. They need it for consumption. They need it for biofuels. They need it for a variety of different reasons. But we're really talking to the American consumer as well that's at the grocery store every week buying a loaf of bread or buying hot dog buns or buying even canola oil. A lot of that's coming from Canada, and a 25% tariff in effect would be a 25% tax on American consumers. So that's a message we're delivering. And finally, we're working with the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance to plan several missions down to Washington, D.C. to meet with members of Congress, meet with senators, and meet with American officials to deliver exactly those key messages so they understand why grain and grain products from Canada are so important for American consumers.
Meagan.
Kyle, what do you think, just bringing kind of these two conversations together, both, the tariff risk that we're facing, but also this prorogued parliament and this lame duck prime minister. He is going to bring premiers to Ottawa next week. What would be your advice to the prime minister, or what do you think that the prime minister and, his current placement within all of this should be doing or should not be doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And look, I'd probably start off the bat by giving kudos to Premier of Ontario, Premier Doug Ford, for all the work he's been doing over the past week. I mean, he's already been on Fox News. He's been on a variety of different media channels in the U.S., speaking to American consumers as to why trade with Canada and trade with Ontario is so important for them. So I got to give kudos there. But I think the message that we would deliver to the government is that they need to be active and they need to be present as much as possible over the next 2 months. And that's why I highlighted from the top that despite Parliament not working for the next 2.5 months up until March 24th, the apparatus of government certainly still is. And I'm thankful that Minister of International Trade, Mary Ng, hasn't shown any signals that she's seeking this Liberal leadership. So at least we have some continuity in some of that advocacy south of the border. And we've worked with Minister Ng internationally at various forums. We've also worked with her on the U.S.-Canada relationship. So she's a known face south of the border, and we'll continue working with her and her office, while also working with opposition parties so that they're making their stamp south of the border. And I think of someone like Jamil Jabani, who I just heard this morning is likely to be at the inauguration of President Trump. He has a personal relationship with Vice President J.D. Vance. So building those relationships between government, between opposition parties, certainly, if we find ourselves in an election in April, May, things are likely to change if you follow the polls right now. So we need to build those relationships early. And we need to make sure that the incoming U.S. administration understands why grain and grain products are so important to American consumers. And I know there's a similar argument to be made on oil, softwood lumber, steel and aluminum. But I think the difference for our sector and agriculture at large is ours is very much an essential product, right? You cannot live without grain or grain products or any other agricultural product going south of the border. So that's the message we'll be delivering and working very closely with the government over the next 2.5 months, 3 months, 6 months, you name it, maybe years, to deliver that message to our partners south of the border.
Kyle, do you think that our explanation of why the trade relationship is important, so America needs Canadian products, is that in 2025 and the mindset that exists, is that not leverage for a lot of people in the U.S. to say, like, why do we need products from this other country? We do need to ensure this and not rely on another country like Canada for some of these things. Now, for cars, you can move a car plant. We've talked about that. Oil out of Alberta is a little bit different story. But when it comes to things that can be moved, is that not giving them leverage? Are we not going to get a bit of a different response this time around? What do you think?
Well, I think for grain and grain products, I think that's kind of that's our strength. I mean, as you said, you can move an auto plant south of the border. You can inshore a lot of different industries into the U.S. What you can't do is increase their landmass. I mean, if President Trump gets his way purchasing Greenland or the Panama Canal, maybe then he is building up his landmass. But I don't think there's a lot of grain farming in Greenland, unfortunately. But all that to say that in the U.S., look, and in Canada, it's the same story. There's not a lot more agricultural prime land that can be developed. Instead, it's actually going the opposite way, where you have major metropolises, be it Chicago, New York City, Los Angeles, anywhere in the U.S., Denver, that are expanding year over year and actually taking up a lot of that prime agricultural land to build condos or houses or shopping malls, whatever it is. So the land mass is actually shrinking to produce grain and grain products, and I think that's why the U.S. imports so much of the wheat or canola or chickpeas or you name it that they need. So I think that's one of our strengths, Shaun, is that you can't technically inshore farming into your country. You need these products being imported into the U.S.
Hey, great stuff, Kyle. Really appreciate you joining us here today on this Friday. Oh, Kelvin, do you have? You look like Kelvin has that look on his face. He has a question.
Yeah. Oh, I have lots more questions, but one more I wanted to touch on capital gains changes that took effect last summer, Kyle. We've actually never seen the legislation supporting it introduced, so obviously it hasn't passed. What happens with that going forward as this government potentially falls here at the end of March?
Yeah, I'm really happy you asked that question because there's two policies I wanted to highlight. One was capital gains. The other one's extended interswitching. So I'll start with your question on capital gains. We've been doing the heavy research this week to figure out where do those changes go? Because as you mentioned, legislation still hasn't been introduced, still hasn't been passed in the House of Commons or the Senate. But Finance Canada did come out this week with a clarification note, as did CRA, to let businesses and farmers know that the capital gains tax increase is going to continue being implemented. And there is precedence around this, actually, that once the government gives direction through a Ways and Means motion and direction in general to CRA to start enacting a policy, it will continue doing that until the government or a new government tells it otherwise. So I think we're in this weird period where legislation hasn't been passed, but CRA is going to continue acting on what the government has directed it to do until they're told otherwise. And we have precedent on this where there's previous policies that CRA has enacted without legislation as well. So this isn't terribly new, but it's not good for grain farmers. And so it's a piece that we're continuing advocating on is against the capital gains tax increase because of how much it's impacting family succession planning. The other piece I mentioned there, Kelvin, is extended interswitching. So the pilot that we're in right now, the 18-month pilot, started in September 2023, set to expire in March 2023. And the only way to extend that pilot or make it permanent, make extended interswitch permanent, is through a piece of legislation. And with Parliament prorogued until March 24th, we won't see a piece of legislation passed before then. So it's a little unfortunate. That's one of my losses I wanted to talk about is we're taking a step back here with we're going to go back to 30-kilometer interswitching, as you know, which is kind of useless for grain farmers in the grain sector at large. So we'll be stepping back from 160 kilometers to 30 kilometers. But the hope is through an election and with a new government, we can have a permanent extended interswitching that's across the country. So I think it's short-term pain with the hope for long-term gain as it relates to that policy.
Great stuff. Hey, Kyle, thanks so much for joining us here today on the show, and all the best. Hopefully, I know we're going to see you through conference season here in the next many weeks, so we'll catch up with you on the road.
Thank you very much. Take care.
That is Kyle Larkin. He is Executive Director with Grain Growers of Canada. We got more to discuss here on RealAg Radio, and we'll do it when we come back.
Calling all Montana, Dakotas, and northern Minnesota growers. Are you looking for a profitable addition to your farm that can deliver value beyond yield? The new seed omega-3 canola production system can help you unlock a guaranteed path to market with attractive premium opportunities and an active God clause. Contracts include first-in-class agronomy support and free on-farm pickup after harvest. Contracts are available now. Commit early to maximize your opportunity. To learn more, visit omega3canola.com.
Before you get back in the field this year, spend some time with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Get all the information you need on hybrid selection, planting depth, crop inputs, and more from a wide range of industry experts. A massive library of video content is available on demand when you need it most. Spend your time outside of the field, inside the classroom, with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com.
Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcasts. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada. Oh, commercial breaks around here. We got a whole Bob McKenzie-like breakdown of Canada's fails in the World Junior from Meagan Murdoch. Forget about the RealAg Issues panel. TSN. You should be talking to Meagan. What did you say, Meagan? Our goalie kicked in a puck in our own net, and it was sort of like Justin Trudeau on ice. Is that how you describe that?
Honestly, the parallels to the current governing party were uncanny while watching the World Juniors. And so I was listening to last week's RealAgriculture panel, and I couldn't help but agree with all the tremendous parallels that the team found during that conversation to Canada's unfortunate performance at the World Juniors this year to our Liberal Party.
Yeah, and just like our World Junior program, where do we go from here? And I think Canada politically is asking some of the same sorts of things. Speaking of the future, the Crossroads Conference is coming up in Edmonton, January 28th and 29th. Crossroads is designed to empower attendees with cutting-edge insights, technological advancements, and sustainable practices crucial for modern farming. You can future-proof your farm and get tickets at crossroadscropconference.ca. Okay, speaking of the future, we've got a Liberal leadership race. First, I want to ask, what was the impression by the panel of the announcement of resignation? Lyndsey, what was your reaction to what we heard on Monday?
I can't repeat it on air, as I think most people who were watching it probably felt the same. If that speech had happened last August, let's say, I think more people could have stomached the words, the feeling, the whatever. But I think watching it really was more maddening than anything, because the words he was saying, how he felt about certain things, what he had come to realize as far as the end of his tenure as a leader of the Liberal Party, it really did sound quite hollow, given the actual events of the past few months of having so many people in his caucus asking for his resignation back in October. It didn't sound terribly sincere. Now, sincere on the front of, is he sorry that, this has to happen and he's going to miss this and all those sorts of that feeling of this being unfortunate? I totally believe that. I don't think he wants to be doing this. I think he actually does finally realize he had to. Great. But it was really hard to listen to, him saying that it's time to go, and then he says it's all this infighting that it almost felt like he was putting blame elsewhere. And it
didn't seem like it. I think he was.
I think he was. And I think that's really difficult for all of us watching to actually think, is sincere and supposed to, somehow feel bad for this guy. I don't think so. I think for one thing, we have covered it on this panel how many times, and for, I don't know, probably more than a year, we're now in a terrible position as a country, dealing with our neighbor to the south and all of that pressure. And had he stepped down in August, had he stepped down in October, so much of this, including an election, including whatever, could have been done and handled by now. Instead, we have a prorogued parliament. We have a leadership election that we have to get through. Then we've got to go back to parliament, then get into a federal election. It's just, the timing is terrible, and frankly, he did this. He could have stepped down how long ago, and should have. Everybody told him he should have. And now we're in a terrible position, and we've all got to deal with it.
Meagan, I'm a bit early with this question because we haven't had an election yet, so we don't know the damage to the Liberal Party yet, in from a numbers and totality standpoint.
Yeah.
But who has left their left-wing party in worse shape? Joe Biden or Justin Trudeau?
Seriously, it's a surprising alignment, and in what has happened to the South over the past year, and then again, it's kind of repeated itself up here in the North. Again, I think about the World Juniors; they're looking for a new coach, and now the Liberal Party is looking for a new coach as well. It was interesting to watch it. A significant moment in history. And actually my reaction was, this isn't very surprising, right? It wasn't surprising, which I think is quite shocking overall. as a former staffer, and this might be a controversial approach with this crowd, but I felt quite bad actually for the Liberal staffers in Ottawa that day, having to go through this and having to lose their leader of the party in such a way. There was just a lack of, I think, dignity, which is a real shame for anyone who puts all of their life and effort and do strive to serve Canadians in politics. It's not an easy job. He did it for a long time. We saw very publicly his relationship suffered as he stood at that podium alone, not with his family, not with his, caucus around him. It's just a long way from where he started. And that was kind of, that was sad really for anyone who gets into politics and has to end it that way. But unfortunately there was a lot of selfishness at the end of the day that led to it. Right. And now his party's in worse shape. They're not ready. Where the country is actually suffering because we have to wait for a Liberal leader to be elected. I thought it was quite selfish to prorogue versus just go to an election and change things. And the Liberals should be very grateful there's not a strong NDP at the moment. I think the Bloc is actually going to be a force to them at the polls. So while we don't know exactly what will happen, Shaun, in terms of numbers, the polling does tell us, we're looking at 2011 Liberal numbers where they are decimated to the third party. And I think they are only saved by the fact that they'll have a fresh face at the top, relatively fresh, and there's no strong NDP. And the Bloc being a one province party will be helpful to them in retaining some seats.
Kelvin, I just continue to wonder who, based on what I think Meagan did a fantastic job of just timelining that out, who in their right mind wants to be the next Liberal leader? I want to be the next to the next, not this one, but people are
third one.
Or exactly. I've used the comparison of the golf course. You want to be the third or fourth owner of the golf course, not the first. Kelvin, but people are going to step up, but we have been seeing this week people taking themselves out of the race. I guess a lot of criticism of the process here. It's freedom to join, how you do so. There is a lot of criticism here, and a lot of people looking at the Liberal Party in terms of how this mechanism works.
Yeah, we got some new clarity last night as the Liberal Party released its rules for this leadership race. So they are tightening up the rules on who is allowed to vote. Until now, it has been there's been no registration fees. This is going back to 2016, I believe. There's been no fee for joining and becoming a registered voter in the Liberal Party leadership election. And until now, there was also no requirement of being a Canadian citizen or even a permanent resident. And they added that requirement last night. The big question I have is how they are going to enforce that, especially if there's no payment collected from people. How are you ever going to, in this short time frame? They've also shortened the timeline for a leadership race in the Liberal Constitution. It requires a 4-month race period, and now they've shortened that. So these are exceptional circumstances for the party in terms of now they've set this March 9th date by when we should find out who the new Liberal Party leader is and who our new Prime Minister will be for at least a 2-week period. As Kyle alluded to, the government is expected to fall shortly after March 24th. So, yeah, we're seeing some names dropping out, like you said, Shaun. Dominic LeBlanc, the newly appointed finance minister who has been Trudeau's fix-it man for everything the last number of years. He pulled out, so not really an Atlantic Canada representation on the table right now. As we've been talking here, it sounds like Melanie Joly has pulled her name off the table, and so that's a major Quebec presence that may no longer be in the running. So it's looking like Mark Carney, Chrystia Freeland, Christy Clark are the trio that are going to be at the top of the ballot. And yeah, I don't know. You raise a good question. Who would want to take over the party in these circumstances? The one thing, I have a bit of a contrarian take on this, and I'm not sure I believe it, but it's a thought or an exercise that I've been working with. The next leader of the Liberal Party will have nothing to lose. This was the party of Justin Trudeau. They're basically starting with their own party, and so what they have an opportunity to shape a national. The Liberal brand is still a well-known brand. In many cases, until the last few years, it was known as one of the strongest political brands in the world. And this is a party that somebody can come in for $350,000 entry fee, can come in and shape this party and potentially resurrect it in the same way that Justin Trudeau did after his leadership win in 2013. Meagan made the comparison to where the party was in 2011 in shambles, and it's going to be the same situation after this next federal election. And so what's there to lose for somebody to come in here? You get to be prime minister for a few days. You get to run this party, and there will be nobody in the party with leverage against you because everybody until now has owed their political career to Justin Trudeau. And so to me, there's almost no risk to running it as long as you're willing to associate yourself with that Liberal flag.
As long as you've got 350,000 just sitting around collecting dust. I mean,
Mark Carney's got a few friends with deep pockets, including his own. I know there are rules on contribution limits, but 350 is a drop in the bucket for some people who are looking at this race.
I think the Conservatives are licking their lips on Carney if he was the leader. Substitute all the criticisms they had for Trudeau and just change the header.
He's very similar, very, very similar. And that leads me to think, what is the future of the legacy of Justin Trudeau has yet to be written, but there's a strong possibility here that he is seen as the person that resurrected the Liberal Party, but also the person that led it to its demise. Look at what's happened in provincial politics across our country. We have Conservative or PC and NDP parties in many provinces that hold the balance, and Liberal parties are nowhere to be seen.
Yeah. And is it I think Kelvin
just hardly to be seen. So
there we go.
Is the same situation. Meagan, what are your thoughts? Could that play out federally here in Canada as well if the NDP ever found a stronger charismatic leader?
Well, I mean, I will give it to them. They had one that did very well in Jack Layton, and unfortunately he passed away, and we didn't see exactly what he could do for that party. If they found someone, they certainly don't have one right now, so they would have to go to a leadership review and a race very soon as well. We can only expect it'll be after the next election.
Okay. I just wondered if we move into a more of a conservative New Democrat type framework. We've seen a little part of it that way.
Well, if McCann was here, he would say Notley. I don't know what's words in his mouth, but
Wab Canoe. Wab Canoe here in Manitoba is a potential.
Yeah. And there are actions that lead to political trends. There's no doubt that, certain people, certain, events will lead to what happens next. But I would also argue that there's a lot of macro and geopolitical forces at play here in terms of the landscape of politics around the world and what's happening in Canada. And, I'd like to think that Conservatives or Liberals, have enough power to sway what happens next. But I do really think that, the tides will change at some point, broadly speaking, and not many of us have much impact on that one way or the other.
Well, Trump says Wayne Gretzky.
Right.
I don't know which party he's leading, but he has suggested Wayne Gretzky. So I'll leave that there. Hey, we got to take a break. We've got more coming up with the RealAg Issues panel. Meagan Murdoch of Hill and Knowlton, Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith of RealAgriculture, myself, Shaun Haney, and we'll be back right after this.
Ready to take your oak game to the next level? Try CDC Endure from Alliance Seed. CDC Endure oats are consistently one of the top yielding varieties in the Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta provincial yield trials. With strong standability, excellent disease resistance, and excellent end-use quality, CDC Endure might be the variety for you and your farm. Available from authorized Alliance Seed retailers. For more information, visit allianceseed.com.
Lima Grain Cereal Seed brings you best-in-class performance for winter and spring wheat, including 12 national wheat yield contest winners in 2024. With the most extensive coaxium portfolio and over 15 top-performing varieties, Lima Grain delivers superior genetics to control grassy weeds when you need it, fall or spring. Boost your yield potential today. Visit limagraincerealseeds.com or call your LCS Regional Commercial Manager for more info. Panel's not very nice to me. They make fun of me during the breaks. It is not cool. I don't understand why they have to be like this. But yeah, I need to have the ego the size of Justin Trudeau, where I can just Teflon it off and let it just slide off of me. But it really hurts. It hurts me inside. Hey, trust Alliance Seed to provide the expertise and information needed to match the right seed to your farm's unique potential. That's the key. Your unique situation, achieving your unique potential. Every seed starts a story at Alliance Seed. Start your success story by visiting allianceseed.com. Looking forward to seeing Alliance Seed next week at Crop Production Show. They're going to be there, I am sure. Stop by the booth, say hello to Jody and the rest of the team at Alliance Seed. Okay, panel, let's transition here a little bit. It was interesting when I was in Pasco, Washington earlier this week. And we're talking about some of the issues and the machinery market. And the one thing is clear from what I heard from the audience there, and you could pretty much talk to any farmer in the U.S. or in Canada. Farmers are like, until machinery prices come down, I don't know if I'm going to be that eager to buy. Kelvin, this just feels like we're at a crossroads here and where we go with this market.
Yeah, we are definitely seeing a slow, and we've been talking about that for a few months here already, as last summer we saw layoffs from a bunch of manufacturers, and I assume machinery costs, if we put 25% tariffs on all the steel and all the inputs that go into manufacturing machinery, or you think of all the manufacturers across Canada that build farm machinery, that with the U.S. as the main market, 25% tax on all of that won't help the cost of machinery either.
Yeah. Now, Lyndsey, on Monday night on The Agronomist, you're going to be talking about this. This has to do with, this ties into machinery very well, because there's a lot of the OEMs that are really focused on the idea of how AI and artificial intelligence fits into their service offering. What's the discussion on Monday night?
Yeah, so Monday night we are going to talk about artificial intelligence. That, of course, will dovetail into automation. We did see this week, of course, John Deere released sort of what it's calling second generation automation. But on the show, we're gonna talk about generative AI. Yes, AI is sort of all generative and all the same, but we're going to talk about sort of the different applications of it. And one of them, of course, is going to be things like autonomous vehicles, machine learning, what we can do with AI currently and what it sort of looks like going forward as far as potentially how we see it currently on sprayers, how we see it in tractors, implements, etc. So, and then we'll also be talking about sort of the business side as well as can we use this for our bookkeeping? Can we use AI for sales? Can we use it for all those things? So that we are going to tackle all of that Monday night, which is super exciting, and I'm looking forward to it. It's bound to bring up some really interesting questions. That's for darn sure.
Meagan, you spend a lot of time with Hill Knowlton in the financial services sector. When you're talking to clients, I just want to pull us out of agriculture to kind of learn from other industries here. How much are financial service clients talking about AI and the use of it and like that? Because we're talking about it a lot in agriculture. I got to think in the financial services, it's the same kind of discussion.
Oh yeah, tremendous use of AI across financial services. It's a very powerful way in order to, crunch the data, analyze risk, try to have that crystal ball on the future that, they've ever had before, right? So when they're advising their clients, they're using any tool and source of information to say, where should that money be invested? Should you move forward with that merger or that acquisition, what have you, right? And AI has become such a powerful tool, not only just in, finding efficiencies, which is incredibly important in the financial services space as well, right? It's how can we find efficiencies, drive our margin, reduce, or increase productivity at the individual level, but also in, how can it support the advice that they're giving? Just yesterday, RBC announced a significant move in the space of AI, where I think they partnered with a major platform. I'm blanking on the name at the moment, but yeah, banks are very much looking at this tool as a source of great opportunity.
Well, and farmers talking a lot about cost saving and cutting costs, but cutting the right costs here in 25, to try to find a higher probability path to profitability. I found it interesting, Kelvin, in the U.S., we got this Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy Doge project where they're trying to, cut costs, trim the budget, what that looks like. But they're actually, I heard an interview earlier this week about it, using AI tools. So it's not like people going through where all the spending is. They're actually using AI to find the outcomes of the cost cutting, which ties us all together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're seeing all kinds of applications, and of course, Elon has got access to some of the top tools in the world and resources in the world when it comes to designing some of this. So I did hear an interview with him though this week where he said that their initial targets are likely out of reach though in terms of
$2 trillion.
That $2 trillion is likely they're not going to be able to reach that in terms of savings. So, yeah, we'll see. In other cases, Vivek has been talking about odd number. So, if you have an odd numbered social insurance number or social security number, you'll be. Didn't he talk about that in speeches earlier on too? Even number employees stay, odd number you're gone, kind of thing. So
simple.
It's not all as complicated as AI. So, and I do find in general, AI has lots of potential, but there's a lot of people talking up the amount that they are using AI in some of these situations. Well, so it's tough to understand sometimes, I think, or get a clear grasp on how much AI is actually doing for us versus how much people are saying they are, because they see the potential in it. It obviously has huge potential, but that's something I think that Lyndsey can discuss with the panelists on the agronomists on Monday night.
Well,
how much is this actually providing value already, or what's the reality versus potential?
If they do build out this AI robot that will help trim and balance budgets, maybe we can out-license it and we can use it when we are trying to do ours. Maybe so, maybe not. Hey, Lyndsey, we're going to take a break. When we come back, though, Lyndsey has to run. So, Lyndsey, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Yeah, Lyndsey's got a great email put together for the Saturday email subscribers, all about what happened this week in Ottawa. I've got a spicy column that she's been assisting me with. So if you don't get our emails, make sure you go to realagriculture.com/subscribe. We're going to take a break. We'll be back with more of the RealAg Issues panel, Meagan and Kelvin and me, right after this.
What's next doesn't happen by accident, doesn't happen by chance.
What's next happens when experience meets expertise, when data meets dollars, and when steel meets earth.
What's next happens when the promising work of Pioneer's state-of-the-art research centers meets the unsparing challenges of more than 17,000 on-farm trials.
Our ultimate goal is to bring the next seed breakthrough to your field.
Because Pioneer isn't just our name.
It's our mission. Pioneer.
What's next
happens here.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. One thing is for sure here today, we're going to be having an exclusive episode of the podcast version of this show because, quite frankly, I have more on my list and we are running out of time here. So you can get the RealAg Radio podcast wherever you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple. It's on YouTube, this show. We do a video version of this show that shows up on YouTube if you want to see our beautiful smiling face, at least Meagan's smiling, beautiful smiling face. Okay, gang, a lot of talk this week, and it's interesting. You think back to the Trudeau's trip to Mar-a-Lago in December. That's where we first heard about this idea of Canada becoming the 51st state. Then it wasn't necessarily just in passing. Mr. Butts, very close associate of the Prime Minister, talked about how actually Trump talked about this in the first administration all the time behind the scenes. And he has not let up. We've seen North American maps covered in the American flag that include Canada, Greenland as well. We have seen Trump on a mountaintop. Not sure it was in Canada, but it was somewhere in the world with a Canadian flag. I guess, Kelvin, what do we make of this? Because in all honesty, I have heard from a lot of American friends in the past number of weeks, especially this week with Trudeau stepping down. Could this happen? Should this happen? What do you think? What's the attitude up there? It's hard, but I have a hard time capturing what the answer to that should really be. What's your thoughts?
I think we need to wake up here in Canada. We think of this as a joke, and we don't take it seriously. And like you had just alluded to, Shaun, there are serious people asking serious questions in the U.S. right now about whether this is possible, or whether this is reality, or whether this is something that could actually happen. And here in Canada, I think we need to wake up. And I think we did see some of that this week in terms of the political leaders in our country responding. We saw Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party. Of course, we saw the Prime Minister. We even saw Maxime Bernier, who we haven't talked about in a long time, the leader of the People's Party of Canada, speak out against this, come out very strongly worded against what President-elect Trump is talking about here, this 51st state stuff. So, yeah, I think we need to realize, and part of this is self-inflicted here in Canada. We've been the butt of jokes on American television. Canada's been the butt of jokes on The Simpsons and South Park and whatever for decades, and we've enjoyed that. We've enjoyed having that role. We also don't mind some of the benefits we get from having a neighbor that is a world power like the U.S. and whether that is not investing in our military and some of the other aspects like that, where we've gotten by in like this. And so, to me, we need to bring back some Canadian patriotism here, and that's another thing that's been lacking especially the last 9 years. We had a prime minister who has announced his resignation this week that called Canada a post-national state. He almost canceled Canada Day a few years ago, if you don't remember, and we had the flags at half-mast for a long time because of how poorly we've felt about our history. And of course, our history is filled with terrible mistakes that were made, but we still need to have something that brings us together as a nation, and I'm not sure that Canada has that defining identity right now, and that's something that Pierre Poilievre, as Conservative leader and future Prime Minister, will have to certainly work on. And maybe we saw the start of it this week with political leaders aligning on this messaging of some Canadian patriotism.
Yeah, like you're going to enjoy my column. We need a shot in the arm of Canadiana is what we need. Meagan, what's your reaction?
Well, again, I think to the World Juniors, and I think our team wasn't hard enough on ourselves. And we kept, putting pucks on the net, but we couldn't actually get any goals. And then we were out in the quarterfinals. And the Americans took the game, took the whole, world championship. So, I can't, we're not hard enough on ourselves, as you rightly said. But I'm on the side of this simply being a joke. And I actually hate that we're giving it more airtime than I believe it deserves. This isn't a Russian invasion of Ukraine. We are not to be annexed. I don't know if I'm just terribly naive or I'm one of these Canadians who, just think that this is silly. And I don't really put much credence in it. We've never had a president like this, but he is a lot of talk. I think the more important part of this whole narrative is what it says about his perspective on our country and how that might impact the implication of tariffs, how that might impact the renegotiation of USMCA. Yep. So all that, like in real practical terms, how it impacts us, but I don't actually put any stock in the U.S. taking over Canada. We'd be more than one state. We're massive. We'd be several states.
I think we got a clear message. We're going to talk about trade in the podcast version of the show here a little bit, but I think it was a very clear message this week from President Trump that we're going to see broad tariffs, and he's talking about breaking Canada economically. Like I'm paraphrasing, but he pretty much said that. So I think there's a huge wake-up call, whether it's for Canadian patriotism or Canadian policy, or just what our plan here is, and it's I think it's pretty concerning for Canada. Hey, we're going to end the show here on RealAg Radio 147 right now. If you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, and make sure you download the podcast version of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast brought to you by AIM EC Herbicide from FMC. Fast-acting AIM EC Herbicide is the go-to tank mix for the hottest spring burn-off of the toughest weeds. Plus, get $4 off per acre with the ACE Resistant Weeds program. Visit ag.fmc.com for more.
Welcome to the exclusive segment that we do. We went out a lot of fun with this, and actually I got some feedback from some of the audience from last week's show saying, like, keep on doing these bonus episodes because you guys get into it and you're not limited by time. So we'll continue to do so. It's a lot of fun, and it's great when we have guests and we can do that, or it's just me kind of riffing like I did earlier this week, airing my grievances. Okay, we were talking about this idea of the 51st state and Canadiana and all this kind of stuff. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play a clip because we heard from the Prime Minister finally post announcing his decision to step down.
Post Freeland's, and he hasn't done an interview since before Christmas, and he did it last night with CNN.
Great point.
What does that say? An American media outlet, and he hasn't spoken to the Canadian public in a month.
Well, he's always had a fascination that way. Remember the Washington Post broke the story. They leaked the Post. Yeah. So they've got a history here. Here's Trudeau talking to Jake Tapper. Of course, Trudeau was in the U.S. for the national funeral, state funeral for former President Carter. So here is Trudeau on Tapper.
President-elect Trump has been needling you a bit, calling you Governor Trudeau, talking about making Canada the 51st state. Did you have any interaction with him today?
No, not today. But that's not going to happen. Canadians are incredibly proud of being Canadian. One of the ways we define ourselves most easily is, well, we're not American. There is such a depth of pride that's not actually an issue. What I think is happening in this is President Trump, who's a very skillful negotiator, is getting people to be somewhat distracted by that conversation, to take away from the conversation around 25% tariffs on oil and gas and electricity and steel and aluminum and lumber and concrete, and everything the American consumers buy from Canada is suddenly going to get a lot more expensive if he moves forward on these tariffs. And that's something that I think we need to be focusing on a little bit more.
Okay, so I think the back end of that, 100% I'm on board with him. Distraction, it's great job. It's the beginning of that I take offense to. I think this is exactly the problem. What is Canadian? We're not American. We're not Japanese. We're not Swedish, and we're not Brazilian either. Like, what kind of answer is that? It feels just empty. Like, I wish Tapper would have said, okay, if you're not American, what are you? And I would have been very interested to hear what his answer is, and think it, for the audience, you tell me what your answer would be. Because I think many people would come up with this blank stare, like when you ask your kids, why didn't you empty the dishwasher? I just think that's the way to, Meagan, what's your reaction to it?
Well, I didn't think it was a great answer from our prime minister. I will put it there. I feel like he should have probably had an answer ready for that. And that didn't sound like one from someone in public relations and comms who help clients all the time develop answers to very logical possible questions in a media interview. That aside, I think it is hard to, describe Canada and what we are in a sentence or less. It's interesting that he chose to say that we aren't Americans on an American media show of which Americans watch. I didn't think that really helped our brand very much, to slag our friends to the South. But I like to think that Canada is a mosaic versus a melting pot. We actually are a collection of many different people who live, in a way that they want to live here in Canada, many different communities, cultures, languages, sporting preferences. I actually quite like that we are a collection of so many different things versus just one amorphous puddle of, just one simple thing. We're more complex, we're more interesting than can be described in just a sentence.
Kelvin, do you think this identity in the fact that, being Canadian is not being American. Isn't this the paralysis that prevents us from improving our healthcare system? Isn't it the paralysis that we have around having a discussion about military spending? Because in both of those topics specifically, and there probably is others, what's the first place people go is, especially let's start with healthcare as an example. The first place people go is, we want the American system, as if there is no other system that exists besides the one that exists to the south of us. It's like this paralysis that we have, and the fascination and the interest that we have in what they have versus what we have, and our idea of what we have versus what the actual reality is. What's your thoughts on that, Kelvin?
Well, and I think that some of that is just a fact of geography of where we are and the scale of our population versus the scale of the American population, and just how media-wise and online.
The border we share.
The border we share, exactly. I can, like, on a clear day, I can see towers on the U.S. side of the border from out my office window here, where we live in such close proximity that we're constantly comparing ourselves to our nearest neighbor. So I think that makes sense that we have that default, but to me, it's not enough to unite around having that as the only thing we have in common across Canada, is that we're not American. We got to find other things that we have in common that we got to stand for, and actually stand for, not just define ourselves by something that we're not. Like, to say we're not American is inherent in the definition of Canadian. Let's say something that we stand for. Let's not just say what we're not. That's where, and then I think on your point about healthcare, Shaun, we can talk about institutions and identity things that in the past have defined Canadians, and healthcare has been on that list of things certainly in the past, but I don't think it's something that we can necessarily say that we're real proud of the state of our healthcare system in our country right now. And so that's not something that I think we can rally around. Maybe if we could find ways to improve it, that would be, but yeah, in terms of always having to make that comparison to our American neighbors and friends, I think that's kind of inevitable, and part of it's a feature of our country, just where we're located.
Yeah. And as someone who lived on an island, lived in New Zealand for many years, and they don't share a border with another country, I saw firsthand how different it can be to be in a country like that versus a country that shares, one of the longest land borders in the world. When I arrived there, I had this view of being a Canadian as being quite British in nature versus American. And upon living in New Zealand, I realized that they were more British than we are at all, because I actually found myself to be quite American, just in the culture, the way, I speak, the way I email colleagues, like a more direct, more maybe blunt approach, like those simple things. I noticed it right away. Whereas, those in New Zealand, the British went there, right? And I think that culture remained there because they do not share a border with another country. So the level of influence there was much less. So I'm not shocked or surprised. And in fact, I saw firsthand how much we are influenced by by our border with America. That said, I think that there's a lot of polarization, right? A lot of political division, again, not specific to Canada, very much a macro, a global trend that is happening with a lot of division between who you are and who you aren't. I would like to think that a leader, a prime minister could, be a leader of Canada, give us that North Star that we should be, brand us on stage as something specific. But, I do think back to the early years of Prime Minister Trudeau being, very much a sunny ways, positive champion of Canadians. And I do think over time, certainly a lot of Canadians soured on what he was trying to say we were, because we are not just one thing. We are so many different things. And there's a really strong polarization that has been happening in Canada and many countries that I think, like even the future prime minister, should it be Pierre Poilievre, which, polls say will be, I still don't think that he will be able to represent all of Canada in the same way, because, he has a particular view that many Canadians do not agree with.
Did you guys see the backdrop for his press conference yesterday?
No.
13 Canadian flags behind him while he was speaking.
Yeah.
Right. Very Harper, very Harper style.
Yes, yeah. And very clear given the circumstances of this week.
So I think it's kind of ironic that, you don't need to agree with somebody politically to say they represent Canada. I think in some ways, for the last 10 years, Trudeau has kind of represented what being Canada is. He's kind of
like bunny socks and costumes on the world stage.
Sort of what we've asked a lot on the show. What does he stand for? Who is this guy? He's hollow. We don't know what he stands for. That is, in some ways, we're asking that today. What actually is Canada? What do we want Canada to be? We have these. It reminds me of a hockey player. Okay. And there's always a sports reference here, and I want to get to Trump really quick because we got to end this. But it kind of reminds me of a hockey player who was really good as a kid. He's got a very significant, he won a Memorial Cup. He maybe got a gold medal with the Team Canada, the World Juniors. Tons of personal accolades. First round pick. All of a sudden, he's 28. He's on the fourth team that he's been on. Maybe in retrospect, probably should have been a fifth or a sixth round pick.
He's burning cash. All of his money that he's getting.
It's all gone.
It's all gone.
Lambos and women, and it's all gone, baby. And all he talks about is how good he was when he was 16 to 20.
Yeah.
And is missing the reality of where he is as a 28-year-old. And while he talks about all that stuff, in the general manager offices and on fan message boards, they kind of snicker and they laugh. And I don't mean to be too harsh. I just feel that's where we're at right now. And we need to wake up to, this idea that I saw this week. I heard the Prime Minister and I've heard other people saying it, the world needs Canada. Do they? Like, what are we doing?
They need our food and our agriculture. That's for sure.
We have this like self value that I just think is not like, I don't know. The Ag Economist Monitor, okay, that Farm Journal does, there was a question, and I'm going to get it wrong, but it was like, if there were retaliatory tariffs by one of these countries, which one would have the most impact on us? Canada got 0 votes. There wasn't one ag economist in the U.S. that chose the largest agricultural trading partner they have. Not one person picked Canada. They chose Mexico and they chose China. They did not want 0.
I thought Kyle Larkin made an interesting point earlier in the show today, though, about how you can't, you can tariff Canada, sure, or products coming from Canada, but you can't, manufacture or grow everything in your own country, right? You can't onshore everything. You simply do not have the land at the most basic level in order to grow the grain you want to grow. So, there's competitive advantage, right? What can each country do at a price point that works best, that makes trade work really, really well? There's things that, yes, you could produce domestically. Can your people afford them? That's a question, right? There's a reason why we don't manufacture a lot of consumer products here in Canada. It does not make sense. It's not our competitive advantage. So anyway, I think that there will be a backlash from the tariffs domestically for President Trump. We have yet to see what it will be. I do feel like his supply chain will react to it once it's in place, once it's clear what that impact will be. Whether that influences him, again, he's not running for re-election. And he's a celebrity first and foremost, not a policy expert. So whether it'll influence or not is another question entirely.
Kelvin, remind me, I haven't played the Trump audio yet, have I? No, we just played the truth. Okay, well, here's I want your reaction, Kelvin, to what Trump had to say, and then we're getting close to wrapping up here.
We're spending hundreds of billions a year to take care of Canada. we lose in trade deficits. We're losing massive. We don't need their cars. You know, they make 20% of our cars. We don't need that. I'd rather make them in Detroit. We don't need the cars. We don't need their lumber. We have massive fields of lumber. We don't need their lumber. We have to unrestrict them because stupid people put, restrictions on, but I can do that with an executive order. We don't need anything they have. We don't need their dairy products. We have more than they have. We don't need anything. So why are we losing $200 billion a year and more to protect Canada?
Again, not losing. I don't know why we keep on using the subsidization and the losing metric. A deficit is not a loss. But
getting in exchange for every one of those dollars, they're getting something that's often underpriced relative to the world market.
Alberta Oil is one of the examples because of the fact we can't get a pipeline built in historically. And you know what? I'll tell you. I said this on Wednesday's show. Coming out of I did that presentation at the PNW in Kennewick. Had a great time with some of the wheat growers. People doing some great work with direct seeding at that crop innovation or crop systems conference. I talked about the trade deficit, and I could hear out of the audience, "You better buy more." Right? This is the transactional side of all of this. I'm not sure why President Trump mentioned milk in that example.
He just said, I think he was saying we don't need to fight to get dairy access one way or the other because we produce enough here. And I guess he doesn't want to export his own dairy. Maybe
no, he was talking about Canadian exports.
I think he misunderstands it. They don't want. He talked about not needing American or Canadian milk coming into the U.S. and of course that's not the issue there, but it's probably, of course, we're getting into the details of that issue then.
Right.
Which he doesn't really tend to focus on.
No. So
the facts, the details.
You listen to that audio and I just hear, and I know it's negotiating. Like don't take everything at its word, but I hear broad tariffs. Bloomberg had this story about how they're going to be very selective and precise, and we know that there's going to be tariffs on steel. Like if there's not tariffs on steel, we've totally all missed the boat on what the messaging is here. But I hear broadness. I do not hear precise, Kelvin.
Exactly, and this is going back to Robert Lighthizer, his original U.S. trade representative, and Lighthizer's disciple is the new USTR and Jameson Greer. That's straight out of his book. He talks about the need for broad tariffs. You can't be targeted. You got to be broad because that has the effect of bringing that investment in those manufacturing jobs back into the country. To me, the big question here is how much inflation are American voters going to be willing to put up with, and whether Trump policies on the tax side of things can offset that inflation, because there's going to be if things don't change on the somewhere else in the equation, there's going to be, all things equal otherwise, massive inflation coming to the U.S. in terms of 25% tariffs on everything from Canada and Mexico, and even higher on everything from China. That steel, there is only limited steel supply domestically in the U.S. Every tractor, every manufacturer that relies on steel in the U.S. market will be paying 25% more if these tariffs come into effect, because steel needs to come into the country from elsewhere, and that demand is inelastic. And so there's going to be inflation if there isn't other policies that offset that inflation. And so how long will the American electorate put up with that? And that's something and how long will it take for that pain to take effect? That's the big question here.
And we don't expect the future Canadian government to subsidize our products on this side of the border in order to make them attractive to American customers either. No, exactly. And so, the Canadian government's purse is limited, and Poilievre is going to tighten those purse strings. And so we're not. And so the question is whether the Canadian economy can bear that lag before American voters realize that their costs are escalating and they feel that pain. So to me, and I think the Canadian, do they influence the president? Is my question. Can they influence the president and what he does?
Maybe not. Maybe he just wants to do his thing and doesn't matter. But I don't know. I think he is ultimately.
Maybe as governors.
Well, I know this idea of the tariff revenue, and assuming consumers, we know that, I'll go with the majority. Consumers are paying the tariff, okay, in the U.S. So it's basically a consumption tax. Okay, consumption taxes, we can have that discussion. There is application for them. So let's just assume it's kind of that consumption tax, and that consumption tax creates revenue that allows them to lower the federal income tax, like Trump's been talking about. That math does not work. I looked at this again. You would need equivalent of a 75% tariff on all goods coming into the United States to be equivalent to what that federal income tax revenue is. It doesn't work.
And does the average person understand that that either, right? Because it's not, my understanding, it's not a line on the receipt when you go out for dinner or when you buy something online, right? It's not a line on the receipt that says, this is the tariff part of this. Yes, you might get a drop in federal tax that would impact, something over here, but the average consumer, the average voter does not understand that swap. It's all in the supply chain. I think that's where we're going to get the pressure because the average American may not see that.
We need a government in place now. Like this needs to happen fast because we need leadership and we need action and we need response. And getting full circle back, the selfishness of having this leadership race to slow all this process down is really, really disappointing.
I think interesting that the prorogation was approved in that real reason. We haven't discussed that a lot.
Being critical about it.
And there is, this can happen any day. But someone has filed a lawsuit, at the Supreme Court level to challenge the prorogation. I've no faith that it's going to do anything, but I thought that was interesting as well this week.
In the long term, I don't know if we want courts being able to overrule the Governor General making decisions either.
Yeah, I agree. So they do because the Governor General signs all of our laws.
Right. We should pause there. There's just so much that has happened, and there's just so much up in the air. I just feel like you could make this a 3-hour show, but we're not going to. We're gonna stop here. Show some discipline, Shaun. And I want to thank Meagan so much for being here today. Great insights and great questions for Kyle as well. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you guys.
Kelvin, you have yourself a great weekend.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Yeah, big plans with the family, I'm sure. Okay. Feedback. We want to hear from, we discovered we didn't, honestly, I'm not sure we actually talked about a specific agricultural topic on today's show, but all of this in this umbrella very much impacts our industry because it's so reliant on trade and also for the supply management industries, what's happening in the U.S., what the policy is, and what the ask is going to be from the U.S. side of the border is going to have an impact on SM as well. What we want from you is your feedback, your thoughts, your questions, your perspectives. What did you agree with? What did you disagree with? You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or of course you can always call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks for downloading the exclusive version of the show here on the RealAg Radio podcast, and all the best to everybody. Cheers.